Hello and welcome. You're watching We Mean Business. It has been a few wonderful days, the best of times, that some would say. But if you were to believe some others, it's not been the best of times for India at the Olympics. The best ever medals tally, 6 medals in all, but no gold medals. And we're already talking of an Indian or a better performance in the 2016 Olympics that happens at Rio in 4 years from now. What does the 6 medals mean, and what does it mean for India's effort as we put in for the next 4 years to improve the tally? To discuss all that and discuss the future and how we could improve upon this tally of 6 medals, I have with me joining to talk all about it, G. Rajaraman. He's a senior sports journalist. He joins me here in Delhi. Sanjay Jha, founder of cricketnext.com, joining from Mumbai. L.S. Ranawat, Executive Director at Sports Authority of India, joining from Delhi, and Ashish Chadda, he's CEO at Sporty Solutions, also joins us from Delhi. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. But hold your thoughts for a minute. Let's get to the big stories, the big business stories for the day, and talk about that first. Inflation for the month of July has been at 6.87% against 7.25% in June, and that is below the 7% mark for the first time since January 2010. Headline inflation is now been at a 32-month low. Let's go across to Ira Dugal, who's got the details of the inflation picture in the country.
There's been a steep and unexpected fall in inflation, and that's certainly good news for the economy. Unfortunately, it's coming in with a lot of caveats, but let's start with the good news because God knows we need it. Let's see what came in. We got 6.87 as the headline number for inflation for this month. That's the month of July. That was much lower than what was being anticipated, which was around 7.25, and it was also a steep fall from the 7.25% tick that we saw in the month of June. So on both those counts, the inflation number was a lot better than expected and came in completely contrary to market expectations. What happened? What brought the number down so sharply? If you look at the components, then the answer is very easy. The fuel and power numbers, which tend to be the relatively less important numbers because they stay very, very predictable, saw a very steep fall to about 5.98%. That's almost half the level of inflation that you'd seen in the month of June, which was 10.27%. We'll explain why that has happened, but that was the one big component which actually pushed the headline inflation number much, much lower. Primary article inflation, there was an expectation that due to seasonal pressures on fruits and vegetables, that would be much higher than the 10.39% that we saw in July, and it was more or less flattish compared to June, so there was some good news even on that front. The bad news came in on manufactured goods, where inflation picked up to 5.58% compared to 5% flat in the month of June. But fuel and power is the point to focus on, so let's try and explain really what happened on that particular index. For starters, there's a large base effect. In the same month last year, July 2011, there had been changes on administered prices, so there was that large base effect to contend with. That immediately brought the index down. But even accounting for that, economists were expecting somewhere in the range of about 7-odd%. So the further fall that we saw in the index was largely on account of global crude prices, which averaged about $102 a barrel on Brent, which mean that unadministered components of that index, diesel oil, ATF, etc., came down fairly steeply in the month of July, and that reflected on the index too. The only problem is that this relief may be short-lived for two reasons. One, global fuel prices have started to pick up, and two, we still need an adjustment on diesel, LPG and kerosene. As and when that comes, that index will go up once again. Other than that, there was one other reason to worry in this time's numbers, and that's core inflation. That's sort of the demand-led component, where you saw a pick up to nearly 5.4% compared to 4.8% in June. So that's something that policymakers will be a little bit worried about, and they may not take the headline number just per se. They'll have to look at the components to try and understand how the inflation trajectory is panning out. Having said that, a drop below 7% is significant, so that does create a little bit of room perhaps for rate cuts, but there is still upside risk to inflation, as has been pointed out by many economists. Fuel prices in particular, and then the weak monsoon, both of those could put upside pressure on the inflation side. Having said that, what everybody is now saying is that there's an outside probability, probably means a low probability, that the Reserve Bank of India could consider a rate cut when it meets in September.
Here are some of the views we got from economists who are not convinced that a dip in inflation numbers would persuade the RBI to cut rates at its September meeting.
Given the extent of the slowdown, I think the knock-on effects of the pricing power, the decline in pricing power that we have seen, is likely to further lower the overall trajectory of inflation, particularly manufactured inflation. And if somehow food prices stabilize. Difficult to see at this current juncture, but if somehow they stabilize over a period of time, I think this leaves the RBI much more room than we had initially anticipated, even going in before this today's show, on their ability to be able to ease monetary policy going forward.
It actually gives the RBI more room to be a little more aggressive on monetary accommodation. But this is going to sort of add to headline inflation and would have second round effects. I'm not too sure whether, if sort of headline inflation shoots up to 8% and it sort of triggers some effects which would also sort of spill over to core inflation, how quickly the RBI can actually sort of, respond positively to it. I mean, it'll have to give it some time to play itself out before, responding, positively in the sense of, cutting rates. So that's certainly a risk. I'm not too sure. The optics of headline inflation at times become very compelling.
Obviously, the number is extremely good, but it's important to read into the details. And I think the number has come down primarily because of the fuel actually coming much lower, and that's really the reason. I think important to look also at the manufacturing inflation, which has shot up. So good news from an optical perspective, but I think yet time to wait and watch.
India's #1 news app just got even better. Download NDTV's new app. Fully optimized for retina display. Full screen view. Faster response time. And Sudoku. NDTV's new iPad app. Download now.